Good morning and welcome to today's Friends Life Care Wellness webinar, Fitness and Durability at Every Age, presented by Dr. Todd Zorinsky. My name is Gail Tamarchio and I'm the Friends Life Care Director of Wellness Initiatives, and I'm delighted to have you join us today. I'll be your moderator for today's session and would like to start by providing some housekeeping information to ensure you know how to fully participate today. Okay, so you should see on your screen a panel that looks like this, and you should see this in the upper right-hand corner. You are listening in by default on your computer audio. If you would prefer to call in on the phone, just go to the audio button and click phone call, and it will give you a number, and you can dial in with that information. Todd Zorinsky is going to welcome your questions today, and he would love you to submit them at any time. So if you see the question box, the arrow is pointing to it on the right. Please feel free to type in any questions at any time, and Dr. Zorinsky will answer them when he can. If he doesn't answer them at the moment you ask them, just be assured that he will answer them before the webinar is over. Also, he may ask you to join in today by raising your hand. So if you see the small box to the left of the larger question box, you'll see at the very bottom there's a yellow palm with a green arrow. So if he asks you to raise your hand, just click on that button and he will be able to see your response. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Dr. Todd Zorinsky. In addition to his Doctor of Chiropractic degree, Dr. Zorinsky holds certifications in various areas of functional medicine, musculoskeletal rehabilitation, easy for me to say, and soft tissue techniques. He has over 14 years of experience in the fields of sports and rehabilitative medicine, and he's looking forward to sharing the best and most current practices for optimal health with us today. And I've known Dr. Zorinsky for quite a while, and I know he knows his stuff, and he's presented webinars for us. He's presented workshops for us in the past to great acclaim. So Dr. Zorinsky, take it away. Thank you very much for joining us today.
All right. And I need to get this to my screen. Give me just a second here. I've done a lot of presentations and lectures around the country, but this is actually my first webinar. There we go. Okay, there it is. So you all should be able to see my screen now. And like Gail said, and thank you for that great introduction. If you do have questions, submit them through that questions tab, and Gail will stop me. I will probably go straight through the presentation, but she'll chime in if there's a good question that applies to any particular concept we're on. Otherwise, we'll get to those questions at the end, or the ones that we can fit in. So on this first slide, I put these pictures up because I am a huge Philadelphia sports fan. Let's see if you can recognize the people in these pictures. We'll start at the bottom right there. That's Mr. Shane Victorino, former Philly, now retired. Met him at the Baseball World Classic in Florida. We were down there because one of my patients, who's on the top right, in the middle there, Mr. Larry Boa, coach invited me and his trainer, who's also in that picture, down to watch them compete down there. We had a great time. In the middle of the screen there, if you don't recognize him, that's Mr. Raul Banez, who I was very lucky to work with for a little while before he went out. There's a guy who was 40 years old and still hitting home runs, so it's nice to know that we got to be a part of his team. But let's get started here. So the presentation is fitness and durability at every age, and we're going to talk about different concepts to keep yourself healthy at every age. Now, of course, in this amount of time, we can't go through everything, but this should start the conversation. And to continue the conversation, I encourage you to reach out to your own healthcare professional. If you don't get answers that you're looking for, keep looking. There's always more answers around the corner. It's just a matter of finding answers. And generally speaking, if your questions that you asked and you get an answer and your gut doesn't quite say, hey, that sounds right, keep looking. It doesn't mean that the person doesn't know what they're talking about, but they just might not have had exposure to certain concepts. So always ask the question. So let's get started here. So why we're here today. So some of us, if we were to ask this question, if I had an audience in front of me at the moment, these are answers I've gotten. Why are we here? Because we want to be stronger, because we want to be more mobile, because as we age, we want to continue to climb, to swim, to dance, to hike, to play with our kids, to get up and down off the floor. to get through our long, boring commutes to and from work without hurting all day. The important thing is to know why you're doing it. So know your why. Ask yourself, what is it I'm trying to get out of this? And that way, when we're done here, if you got that, great. If you didn't, ask the question. All right, so I like to start with this slide because these are the things I hear every day in my clinical practice. We talk about exercises, we talk about workout routines, we talk about ways to avoid pain, to alleviate pain, to improve function. And these are the things that I hear from my patients. And they're in no specific order. But, one of the big things I hear all the time is I don't know what to do. That's misinformation. I was told I should never run again. Or one of my favorites is when somebody says, well, my orthopedist said I shouldn't squat. And I get that. Maybe we can put weight on our back and squat, but if you're not going to squat, how do you expect to get off the toilet or off the dinner table or out of your car? A lot of these things that we're told we should do or not do are really a part of our daily lives. They are required. And once we stop doing them, or once we forget how to do them, bad things start to happen. Arthritis is probably the least of those worries, but it's the one that most people know about. Time. Who has time? I don't know about all of you listening. I know there's about 70 people on paying attention here at this seminar right now, which is fantastic. I'm sure a lot of you have children, whether they're young or older. They take most of my time. I have 3 children. And where do you find time to add this stuff in? First time that I went to a chiropractor, they gave me some exercises and they said, just take about 10 minutes a day and do these. Well, at the time in my life, I had 10 minutes a day. Now, I don't always have 10 minutes a day. So the things that I teach, generally, we try to work into your daily routine already. These are things you can do at work. These are things you can do at home while the kids are watching a TV show or playing on their iPad or whatever they're doing. We try to make it practical. Fear. Fear is a big one that goes back to misinformation. Mental health. People that are dealing with anxiety. And let me just say this. I'm not a therapist. My wife is a social worker, and from day one has run our practice. And let me tell you, her skills come in quite well, because when you're dealing with chronic pain, you're dealing with depression. It only takes about 3 months for that to set in. And people don't realize sometimes that they're dealing with depression, but that becomes a big obstacle to them moving forward. There's fear and mental health all in one. Pain, of course, psychosocial aspects. I want to go to the gym, but there's all these people there that seem to know what they're doing better than I. I don't want to look like I'm not knowing what I'm doing. Or I go to a yoga class and I try to look like the person in front of me and wind up pulling my back. Right? Accessibility. Do you have anywhere to go? And what we'll talk about later is, do you need anywhere to go? You can do this all right on the floor at your home. Location just has to do, sometimes with the space you're in. Also accessibility. And there's a whole bunch of these. More often than not, when I teach some exercises, and some of them, may seem a little silly to people at first because they've never seen them before. Well, they're probably less inclined to do them in front of their family at home or in front of their friends at the gym if they think they're odd. So we try to get those stigmas out of the way. So on this slide, that's my family. Now you all know what I look like, and my 3 children. And like I said before, big Philadelphia sports fan. But what I put at the top of that slide is a question that has in different ways come to me through my patients. What if my obstacles to training and my why to keeping fit are the same? In other words, I want to be as strong and mobile as I can so that I can play with those 3. So I can coach my son, so I can go with my daughter to her soccer practice, so I can pretend I know how to do gymnastics with my middle one. I want to be able to do those things. That's why I want to train. But because I have so much time and energy I have to give to them, well, that becomes an obstacle. How do I fit that all in? And that's what we're here to talk about. What it comes down to is efficiency. All right, we want to be efficient in our fitness, in our self-care, in our rehab, in our diagnosis. In my office, the most important thing that I can do is diagnose the problem. I am a chiropractor. Chiropractors historically here and there have gotten a bad rap for just kind of going in and doing adjustments. Some of you, I'm sure, have been. Many of you, I'm sure, have been at this point. But it's a very broad spectrum, this practice of chiropractic. And my particular angle on it is sports medicine. It's what I enjoy. Everyone is an athlete. Anybody who wants to move and walk or run or jump or anything I'm going to look at them as an athlete. So I want to be as efficient as I can be in figuring out what is going on with them, so we can also be efficient in giving them ways to correct their issues or correcting them for them, so that they don't go in this endless cycle of frustration and fear. So there's my why. All right, on that issue of efficiency. Efficiency is instinct. We are, from way, way back in caveman days, we are built to conserve energy unless we really need it. I used to make the joke when I would do these lectures and I would say, how many of you are runners? And a bunch of people would raise their hand, and we'll talk about that more later. But what I would say to them is, generally, I try to reserve running for getting away from the bad guy. I don't typically use what most of you call running, I would probably call jogging. I don't really use that as an exercise tool, and there are reasons. It can be difficult on the body. But if your goal is to run or to jog, then we need to work towards making that most efficient. And a lot of times people wind up getting injured because of this repetitive stress that it can create. Our culture makes it really easy to conserve energy. You can just sit in front of your computer all day long. You can see the world on your computer. You never have to go anywhere. That's highly efficient when it comes to conserving energy, but terrible for us, as you all most likely know. All right, is it best for us? Is it healthier? Is it going to bring us greater joy? If you look at a pretty trail on the computer, is that going to bring you as much joy as going and hiking that trail? Probably not. I guess it depends. All right, knowing the path, walking the path, these are two different things. And this gets into a whole other side of this that we don't have a ton of time to go into, which is the psychological component of it. But I would bet that most of you, if I asked you, what does a healthy diet consist of? I'll bet that most of you know exactly what a healthy diet consists of. I'll also bet that most of you struggle maintaining that. And that comes down to a lot of lifestyle factors. We want to consider those all the time. But knowing the path is different from walking it, and what gets in the way of walking it is what we're here to talk about. So this is just expanding on the efficiency. This is a slide of silliness. This is not, don't take this seriously. If we want to explore, we could walk, we could bike, or we could drive somewhere, sit on the internet and look at it. If we want to be stronger, we can train, or people can take steroids. That is not a good option. Is it more efficient to get to the goal of looking stronger? Perhaps, but it's certainly not more efficient at getting healthier and lasting longer. In fact, quite the opposite. Weight loss, I once asked a patient, because I said to them, I'll bet you know how to eat healthy. I said, what do you think is the quickest way to lose weight? And that patient looked at me and said, cigarettes and amphetamines. And of course they were being very sarcastic, but I busted out laughing. I thought that was hilarious, and so now I've used that in my presentations because it's true. If someone is, doing something terrible to their body like that, where they're affecting their ability to even feel hunger, yeah, they're going to lose weight. They're going to be very unhealthy. You may remember a product called Fen-Phen back in the 90s that was on the market and then off the market. Fen-Phen, the word fen comes from amphetamine. That's what that was. That's what that is, and it's still used to some degree. I've had a lot of adults and kids who have different levels of attention deficit disorder, and some of them are taking medications that are amphetamine-based, like Adderall and Ritalin. And I'm not here to speak on whether or not they're appropriate or not. They have their diagnoses and their docs that are handling that. But a lot of times one of the side effects is they lose their hunger. It's not necessarily a good thing. They have to remind themselves to eat healthy foods. All right, so just remember, efficiency is important in achieving our goal. It can also get us into trouble if we're not thinking ahead. Efficiency in fitness, well, that means we're saving time. Okay, yes, we want to maximize benefits in the least amount of time. Okay, you can go to the gym. Most people, if I ask them, if they're already going to a gym and exercising, I say, how long do you spend there? Most people say about an hour. Okay, what if I told you could get the same amount of gains? In fact, you can get more gains, 9 times more gains, by only working out for 20 minutes. And you'd say that's a pretty good deal, right? So it comes down to how we can be most efficient to achieve this goal. Now, I will admit that a lot of people, including myself in the past, will tell you that they go to the gym to get away. It's a meditation. It can be a social endeavor also, A lot of times it's just their quiet space. So if you want to spend an hour at the gym having that quiet space, by all means. Like I said, I have 3 kids. I know the value of quiet. That said, if the goal is to create better efficiency in the workout, you can spend an hour at the gym and maybe you get done your workout in 20 minutes and then you can go sit in the hot tub and enjoy, right? To limit injury, we have to learn how to move. That is not an easy thing to teach because we've all unlearned over the years how to move because of sitting in chairs in school for, years, and then sitting in a work environment, and then sitting in our cars to get to and from work. So, we have to learn how to move again, and we're going to go through a lot of things that will teach you that. But make that a goal long term. When somebody says, "Hey, I want you to do a bicep curl," or "I want you to do a plank," how you do that makes all the difference in the world. You can put weight on your back and you can stand up from a seated position and say, "I lifted 100 pounds." But if you're not doing it correctly, you will get hurt. And anyone who's ever gotten hurt is living proof of that. And that's just about everyone, including myself. All right. So learn what the pain is saying. Pain is a language. And to interpret the pain means we've had some, we've asked the questions, we start to know what it means. What is my pain telling me? All right. We're going to talk about pain a few times throughout this presentation. But let me just say that in general, when you're doing a movement, any movement, reaching into a cabinet, getting out of a car, lifting a weight, if there's a discomfort that is between 2 joints, okay, so between my shoulder and my elbow, the only thing in there really is muscle. There are some referred pains you can get in there, but for the most part, we're talking about the muscles in between the joints. If you feel discomfort there, that's generally not a bad thing. That means you're using the muscle. However, if you feel joint pain, so at the joint itself, shoulder or elbow, generally that means you're creating an injury. Not always, but generally. All right, so when you want to talk to your practitioner, whoever they are, and they say, "Well, what makes it hurt? Where does it hurt?" If you point to the shoulder in my office or you point to the elbow, I know you've got a movement issue. If you point to the tricep and you say, "My back of my arm just burns when I do this push-up," I go, "Well, good, that's supposed to happen." All right, so understanding what the pain is telling you is really important. Pain is not a bad thing. We do not want to numb our pain, especially before activity. Some of you probably play tennis or golf, maybe many of you. I can't tell you how many times people come in and say to me, "Well, my knee was hurting, so before I play tennis, I always take 2 Advil or I always take 2 Tylenol." That is a horrible idea. After tennis, after golf, if you're hurting and need some relief, whatever you're comfortable and your doctor says is okay to take, by all means. But taking those medications before activity, well, that would be the equivalent of you're driving around in your car and the car starts making a clunking noise, so you turn up the radio. It gets rid of the clunking noise, but it does nothing to solve the problem that your car is now overheating and you're about to blow a piston. All right? Understand what the pain is telling you. Don't avoid it. Learn from it. All right, so what's the plan here? One of my favorite Mark Twain quotes, even way back in Mark Twain days, and this man was not a fitness guru. Those of you who know him or of him, he was a heavy drinker and smoker and very sarcastic, but a brilliant writer. Be careful what you read in health books. You could die from a misprint. People bring in their books all the time, and they show me. They say, "Hey, it says in here I shouldn't eat eggs anymore." Okay? I don't really know how to use this show of hands things too much, but I'm curious how many of you think that eating eggs is bad from a cholesterol standpoint. Now, this whole concept of eating eggs increases your cholesterol, this was debunked 15 years ago, well, longer than that, actually. But it's only recently made it into the public mainstream. Cholesterol, and this is just a side note, we're not going to go too far into the nutrition side of it, but cholesterol is made by your body. 80% of the cholesterol that is circulating in your body is made by your body. So if you eat more, you make less. If you eat less, you make more. It's an essential part of our healthy hormonal system. Take a woman who's starting to enter menopause, her hormones aren't being produced as much, so her body starts to produce more cholesterol to create more hormones. Cholesterol is the base chemical for the hormones. So the doctor takes their blood and goes, "Wow, your cholesterol is a little high. I'm going to give you a statin." That lowers their cholesterol. They now don't have that base to produce reproductive hormones, and they essentially catapult themselves into menopause. I'm not saying don't take them. That's for you to work out with your doctor, but you definitely want to get educated on when and why. It can be very confusing what you read out there. That's why we want to ask the questions, and we also want to consider the source. A lot of times what you're reading is marketing. Keep that in mind. Truth is free, period. All right, you go to the market, apples on the shelf in the market, they never say good for you. They're quiet. They're just laying there. There's no sign on them that says they're good for you because it's the truth. We know that. But the box of crackers says heart healthy, because otherwise you might not buy it. All right, let's move on there. All right, so let's get into it. What do we need to be fit and healthy? We need endurance. That's our cardio system. We absolutely need strength. All studies that have been done on long-term health, the Harvard longitudinal study, to name one that's been done for the last 70 years on and off, we need strength. We need our muscles to stay strong. And the earlier you get started on that, just like an investment, the more you have later in life. Even if you trained as a child and then didn't for 20 years, that training you did as a youth is going to come back and help you when you start training again as an older adult, because your body remembers. Mobility is a word that we use for control of motion throughout our action. So if I'm raising my arm up, does my shoulder blade move the way it should as I raise my arm up? That's the mobility component. It's not flexibility. Flexibility is part of it, but mobility is the key, controlled motion through space. All right, so why do we want these three things, endurance, strength, and mobility? For all the reasons that you all know, right? Improves bone density, better energy, better sleep patterns, better blood sugar balancing, joint stabilization. On the bottom left there, I put in endocannabinoids. Okay, if you don't know what those are the little happy hormones that are released when we exercise at a certain level, the quote unquote runner's high. That is endocannabinoids being released, right? The root of that, if you see that, especially in the current environment with medical marijuana making its way onto the scene, cannabis. These are chemicals that attach to the same exact receptors that cannabis attaches to. And our body makes them. So you can get high whenever you want, completely naturally, just by doing the right kind of training. And that's all out of a book called Spark by John Rattay, which I believe I referenced at the end, but just in case. Also, if any of you watch TED Talks, there's one by Amy Cuddy about posture and hormone health. It's one of the most watched TED Talks ever. And she talks about several studies that show just looking into a mirror and raising your arms up like you want to race will instantly raise your testosterone and serotonin levels. So she suggests doing that before you go in for interviews or an exam. All right, let's get through some of the myths. Endurance, we think of endurance exercise as steady state exercise, walking, jogging, elliptical, bicycling, anything where you're increasing the heart rate over a specific amount of time. The myth is that the higher the heart rate, the more fat is burned, and that is completely false. The myth is that if you push until you fall over or throw up, you've done a great workout, and that is completely untrue. That's a good way to start increasing your cortisol levels, hurting your heart, and creating more injuries. Okay, fat burns best at the lower heart rates. That's why on the treadmill, you have a little line that says cardio up at the top showing a high heart rate, and way down below that at a lower heart rate, you have a line that says fat burning. Okay, we forget this because we want to feel like we're accomplishing something by working extra hard. That's survival. We don't want to survive. We want to get strong. All right? Fat burns best at lower heart rates. Cortisol is that hormone that's released under stress. It produces more blood sugar when we're getting low on blood sugar from training too hard or when we need to manage our stress, whether it's physical, emotional, it doesn't matter, or chemical. Cortisol is released. The problem with cortisol is that it creates more blood sugar by chewing up our muscles, chewing up our ligaments, chewing up our tendons, because the brain can only feed off of sugar. So when our blood levels get low, cortisol is released. But the problem also with cortisol is that it then takes whatever you eat next and stores it as belly fat so that it has more energy for the future. So we want to keep those cortisol levels low, and the way that we train is a great way to manage that. In the middle of the slide, you'll see optimal heart rate, right? This is a generalization, but there's different formulas out there, but this is a good one to follow. If you're doing a steady state endurance exercise, walking on a treadmill, on a bike, on an elliptical. Try to get your heart rate to about 180 minus your age. Okay, I'm 44, so let's just say 45. So 180 minus 45 is 135. If I'm doing steady state training, that's where my heart rate should be. If my heart rate's at 160, I need to slow down. If it's at 100, I can speed up a little bit. That's about where you want to be. Okay, that's where you're creating challenge without stress. Use that formula, and if you find that you have to slow way down in your training, great. After a little while, you'll be able to speed up again and still maintain that heart rate. Human muscles, 80% slow twitch. Those are our dark, like in a chicken, you have dark meat, white meat. We're all kind of mixed, but the dark is the endurance muscle, and we're more endurance muscle fibers than we are fast twitch power fibers. So we want to make sure that we have that in our training program. Okay. At the bottom, we say that a lot. You want to heat the room, not burn the house down. That's the whole idea of challenge without stress. All right. All right. This slide is just to point out. There you are. This slide is just to point out an important concept in training. On the left, you see a men's Olympic marathoner. This is from 92, I believe, 92 Olympics. On the right is an Olympic 100-meter sprinter. Okay, now let's just assume these guys are all natural in their diet, because sometimes they're not, but let's assume they are. Who do you want to look like in your training? What side of that fitness spectrum do you want to work towards? Because in my opinion, I want to look more like the guy on the right side there, the sprinter. Right? He's got muscle, he's got strength and power. The guy on the left, I mean, if he wasn't in a runner's uniform, you might not think he's that healthy. And the truth is, a lot of, especially the amateur distance runners, are not healthy. Their blood work does not look good because they overtrain and their body can't keep up, and it starts to chew up its own muscle, ligament, and tendon from all the cortisol. Okay, sprinters, these are the laziest guys on the track. They run 100 meters and then they sit down for 5 minutes, and they look like that. Okay, this is going to lead right into our next topic, which is interval training, and how interval training, high intensity / low intensity, gives you much better results than long distance cadence running or any endurance training. All right, so here's the interval training. So the myth, intensity over time gives you results. Go as hard as you can until you are collapsing and you'll do well and you'll be stronger. Nope, not true at all. All right, the fact is that short bursts of high intensity intervals with long rest periods between them gives you much better results, much quicker, much safer. There's a study, Journal of Applied Physiology, I reference it at the bottom there, that in 2 weeks, 6 workouts over 2 weeks, one group jogged for a half hour, the other group did an interval sprint for a half hour, which is 30 seconds of running and then 90 seconds of walking. So they're sprinting for 1, they're walking for 3. And that interval group in 2 weeks increased their fat burning 9-fold compared to the jogging group. They got 9 times more fat burning in just 2 weeks. They had double the ATP production, which is their power for the cell, and their HGH levels, which is the growth hormone, it's kind of our fountain of youth hormone, went up 700%. Okay, and you don't need a half hour of this. You can accomplish this. In the middle of the slide, I put the actual protocol. 30 seconds, high intensity, 90 seconds, low intensity, for 8 cycles. You can do it on a jump rope if you can jump rope. It's one of the best whole body exercises you can do. You can use an elliptical, a bike, you can walk, run. If you're going to walk, run, make sure you can run. And this doesn't really work well on a treadmill because you have to wait for the thing to speed up and slow down. I generally, for interval sprints, I recommend people go to a high school track or outside. That's the protocol. And it can really be done with any exercise. I prefer jump rope because I don't have to leave the house. The kids can be inside. I can be out on the deck. I can do my jump rope. I can walk around. It's an effective way to train. And these are just some examples. Like I just said, jump rope as fast as you can for 30 seconds, walk around for 90 seconds. Sprint for 30 seconds, walk for 90 seconds. It's not sprint, jog, it's sprint, walk. So if you're on an elliptical, as fast as you can for the 30 seconds without falling over, and then 90 seconds at what you would consider a walking pace, just turning the pedals over. All right, we want challenge without stress. We want to heat the room, not burn the house down.
Oh, Dr.
Right,
Cernsky, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Oh,
yes, please.
I just had a question for you. So when you said you don't want to go over your heart rate 180 minus your age, But when
Yeah.
you're doing the interval training, you are going over your heart rate to that 30 seconds. But that's because you're not doing
great
a steady
question.
state.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you for that question. Very good point Gail makes. When you're doing steady state endurance exercise, you're using that formula of 180 minus your age. But she's absolutely right. When you do interval training, that 30 seconds, your heart rate's going to shoot up. That's why you have the 90 seconds. That is a recovery period where your body is allowed to recoup and prepare for the next interval. And that's where all the magic happens. Kind of like we work all day, and we have to sleep well so that we can recover and prepare for the next day's work. If we don't sleep well, our whole life's go to pot, right? So in the interval training, you don't really watch your heart rate. You can, and what you look for as a sign of progress is that in the 90 seconds that you're not at a high intensity, your heart rate is more quickly coming down in those 90 seconds. So the first time you do this in that 90-second rest period, your heart rate might not come down that much. But after a few weeks of this, you notice, oh, wow, by a few seconds into this 90 seconds, my heart rate's starting to relax again. That's recovery. Recovery defines health. So great question. Did I answer that for you?
You did. And I just have one other thing to say too. A lot of the smartphones now have the interval app, so it rings a little bell, so you can set up whatever interval you want. So people can put that on their phone, so that way they can kind of keep track of it.
Yes, and in fact I use one of those. I don't remember what it's called. I think it's called a round timer. The one I use, like a boxing round timer. And yeah, you can set them to any interval you want. So if you're doing the jump rope, like I was recommending, it'll beep at you when your 30 seconds is up, and it'll beep at you when it's time to start again. It's a good point.
Excellent. And then somebody had a comment too. They said, please focus on walking. Can we do fast and slow walking, since sprinting or jump roping are kind of out of the question for them at this point?
Yes, absolutely. And again, a good point. Some of this, when I don't have the people in front of me, gets missed, but that's a great point. When you first start intervals, 30 seconds is a long time to go all out. The key is to get that 1-to-3 ratio. So maybe you start with 10 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Maybe you do 10 seconds at a medium fast pace and 30 seconds at a walking pace. Because you don't want to start out the gate as fast as you can possibly go if you don't know what that is yet. So that's a great point. Work your way up to it. Assuming all things are equal, you want to get to the point where you can go all out. But in the beginning, it is far more important, as we said earlier in this presentation, to listen to what your body's telling you. And if you do an interval sprint and you start to feel dizzy or your knee starts to hurt, I don't want you to keep pushing on that. The first time you do this, you might not do 8 cycles. You might only do 4. You might only do 10-second interval sprints. You might take a longer rest period. That's okay. This is the goal we're working up towards. But you have to start, assuming that you've spoken with your clinician or myself or anyone else, you want to start where you are able to complete this workout without hurting yourself, and so that you can keep building on it.
Okay, and somebody else asked a question too. Could you please just focus on walking? Like if you just can't sprint, but you do slow walking and fast walking. Is that possible too for the intervals?
Yeah. No, sorry. That's what I was saying earlier. Yes, you can slow walk and fast walk. You can also, if you're on a treadmill, you can increase the incline. So some people have told me, fast walking for them. One of my patients, he's much older. He uses a cane, but he wants to do this. So he gets on a treadmill and he just turns up the incline. He can hold on to the handles on the side, and therefore he won't fall. And he uses the increased intensity that walking uphill creates as his interval. And that's fine. And that's the beauty of this whole thing, is it can be anything. There are times where I can't leave the house and I just run up and down the steps. That's not for everybody. But whichever activity works for you can be modified into this program versus just walking. And if you can't do the intervals, you can just walk. The Harvard longitudinal study said that walking 20 minutes a day will give you a 5-year increase in life expectancy, regardless of where you're starting in your health: obesity, blood pressure, smoking. So walking is the key. I mean, that is man's best medicine. Socrates said that a long time ago. All right, but when we're ready to step it up a little bit, the interval approach is the most efficient way to get to that next level, as opposed to just saying, well, I'm just going to walk faster for a longer period of time. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you very much. Appreciate that clarification.
Yeah. So let's get into the strength side of this now, because this is my favorite part. This is where we get to really learn some movements. All right. Every gain in muscle mass accelerates metabolism. On this slide, I put in there this little bit of info that your muscles, even at rest, burn anywhere from 3 to 25 times more calories than fat. 1 pound of muscle, about 50 to 350 calories a week just to survive. Pound of fat, about 14, which means once you get the ball rolling and building more muscle, the momentum kind of builds. It takes over for you. You don't have to work as hard. That's why people generally who are fit, they go away for a couple weeks on vacation. They may not eat well. They may not train much. They're still okay. They keep moving forward. It's getting started that is difficult in all things. Building momentum is difficult. But getting through that initial phase is about knowing what you can and can't do so you don't get hurt. And once you start to see those gains, they start to build on themselves without you having to work as hard. One of my favorite parts of training. All right, just another myth. No pain, no gain. We talk a lot about this. I'm not going to go too much into this now because I want to get through all these slides. But, hurting to get through a workout, you've seen the pictures of the guy doing a squat and his face is all contorted and he's grunting and screaming. That's not good. I actually personally know somebody who's very slightly built. He's about 160 and almost 6 feet. So he's a thin guy. And he would grunt and he would strain. He actually gave himself a carotid aneurysm and then he's okay now. He survived and he's back to his exercise and he's toning it down. But he could have died. And that was from straining way too hard every time he worked out. That is not a good idea, ever. So if you're making a face when you're working out, if you look in the mirror and you saw your facial expression and it says this doesn't feel good, you're either working too hard or you're not moving correctly. That's when it's time to stop. Okay, and then ask for help. Sweet pain versus sour pain, that's the difference right there. All right. The most important part of any exercise you learn is the form, is the technique, is how you're supposed to move. We can teach it in very technical ways. We can teach it in very general, somewhat cerebral ways. But the technique and how you do it is what matters most. A squat is not a squat unless it's done right. One good squat is way better than 10 bad ones. One good step walking is way better than a mile walking poorly. Injuries happen with repetitive stress over time. I coached Little League for years, and I watched these little kids throw the baseball. And I would harp on their technique on how they threw it. Okay, because if they throw wrong early on, they always throw wrong, and then they hurt their shoulders. Or they wind up with that Tommy John surgery that unfortunately has ruined a lot of baseball careers. All right, so good form, good results. Poor form, injury. Posture isn't something you force. Posture is the result of your good strength over time. Okay? Bad posture is the result of poor positions over time. If you sit at a desk for 8 hours a day, it is really hard to have good posture. Don't beat yourself up too much on it. Let's work on ways to compensate for that after the fact. All right, another myth. Pain or burning in the muscles mean they need to be stretched. This is a really important one. When a muscle hurts, not when you're working out, but just throughout your day. A lot of people come in and say, my hamstrings are really tight. I say, what makes you think they're tight? They go, well, because they hurt. Okay, pain does not mean a muscle is tight. And the best example that most people will understand is if you sit at a computer for too long, where do you get sore? Most people get sore in their upper back, where the traps are, in the back of the neck. They get pain there. They start rubbing it. Are those muscles tight? No. Their shoulders are rounded forward. Their head is dropped forward. Those muscles, if anything, are overstretched and therefore working too hard trying to keep your head from falling off and therefore inflamed. Pain in the muscle means inflammation. It does not mean tightness. In that example of the person at the computer, where is the tight muscle? The tight muscle is in the front, their pec, their chest. Right? Most people will stand up, they'll stretch their arms out, they'll push their chest out, or they'll go into a doorway and do a chest stretch in the door. They kind of know naturally what to do. But the tight muscle is the silent muscle, usually on the opposite side of where it's hurting. When your hamstrings hurt, when you actually feel discomfort there, burning throughout the day, soreness, rarely is that a tight muscle. Where is the tight muscle? Usually it's their hip flexor. Usually it's their quad in the front. Okay, and that little tidbit alone, I could have an entire practice just teaching that. I've taught that so many times. Learning how to stretch your hip flexor appropriately, learning how to release the quads appropriately, better knee health, better low back health, and then it takes your mind off this idea that when your hamstring hurts, you have to stretch it. A painful muscle is generally a slightly overpulled muscle, and the last thing you want to do is stretch a muscle that's already overpulled. That's why it never works. That's why people say they stretch their hamstrings all the time, and they never really feel better. And there's a lot of little things you can add into that that'll make that much more productive, but those are things that we have to show you in the clinic because we just can't fit them into this presentation. But just keep that in mind. People that get calf pain, generally the calf is in a weakened state. It might have something to do with the hip or knee. It might have something to do with the ankle, but rarely is it the calf muscle that's the issue. Okay, keep that in mind. Next time a muscle is burning, if you're not sure what the opposite side is, figure it out, look at a book, come ask me, ask your practitioner, look it up online, and see if you can't find an opposite muscle to try to work on, see if you don't feel better.
Oh, Dr. Swinsky, I have a question for you. Okay, so someone was wondering, if you're not a member of a gym, how can you find out if you're doing if your form's correct?
Well, I'll take that question a little further. If you are a member of a gym and they have trainers there, how do you know they're teaching the right thing?
Okay, good question.
And that's the problem. I mean, there are some phenomenal trainers in my area, and there are a lot more that kind of just go through the motions. A trainer in a gym or anywhere really, their number one goal is accountability. They're trying to keep you on a plan. So first and foremost, they're a coach. They're pushing you forward. But if you're trying to stay healthy, we got to make sure they know how to teach what it is you're doing. If they just say, hey, go do 10 squats on the leg press and then I'll see you after, how do you know if you're doing them right? That's the bigger issue, is that oftentimes it's not taught correctly. And what I can say to you is you don't need a gym. You can do this everything that I do in my workout, I can do in my house. The only thing I can't do in my house is a pull-up, but I go out to the playground if I'm going to do some kind of pull-up type motion. Okay, you don't need the gym for any of it, but the gym gives you a place to go, a meditation, an hour of quiet, and oftentimes there are trainers there that can give you some pointers on how to do better. There are certain certifications that if I see a trainer has, I know they have a better idea of what's going on and how to look at what you're doing. But just like any doctor out there, if in a couple weeks working with any doctor or any trainer, if your gut is saying something's not clicking here, their ego should not be affected at all if you look elsewhere. In fact, you should ask them. You should be able to say, hey, I don't feel right with this movement. Is there someone else I can ask about this? And they should go, you know what? Yeah, let me find somebody for you. That's what we do in our practice, because nobody has all the answers, and we're supposed to be a team. Hope that answers your question.
Good advice. Oh, that's good advice, Dr. Swinsky. What kind of certifications do you look for in a trainer? Yeah,
right. Thank you for circling back to that. One of the ones I look for is the letters FMS, F as in Frank, M as in Mary, S as in Stephen. That stands for Functional Movement Systems. If they are FMS certified, they generally have gone through quite a bit of technique training. There's another certification called Original Strength, which I really like. You can ask them if they've learned that. There are different kettlebell certifications. And by the way, if anybody wants to do kettlebells, do not unless you have instruction from somebody that's certified in kettlebells, because kettlebells are phenomenal for training, but they are unforgiving. And I have witnessed with my own eyes several people in the middle of a kettlebell swing throw their back out and they're down on the floor. And that's when I have to decide whether or not I want to keep exercising or helping them. But usually I go to help them. So, looking for the FMS certification I look for first, if they're Original Strength, and then just see how they do when you start training also. If your gut tells you they know what they're doing, great. If something starts to hurt, doesn't make sense, ask the question. All right, now we're going to get into the actual exercises. Oop, wait, let me go back for a second. If it lets me. Maybe, hang on one second here. There we go. Okay, so we're going to focus on these top two exercises, the squatting and the crawling, because they're so very important. A push-up takes a lot to teach that, although that is also important. And a pulling up motion, which doesn't have to be a pull-up on a bar, is very important as well. But we're not going to get into those now because they're not as important for our primary goal, which is to stay on our feet, be able to get up and down from the floor, to not fall over. Those are the things we're focusing on now. So these next few slides are videos that they're not in your handouts, obviously, because they're videos, but you'll be able to access them through this presentation. And they're me, and they've got some direction on them. And we're talking about very quickly some of the key points on these movement patterns. So if you watch them and it goes too fast, or you can't, you can just go back and replay these videos over and over as much as you need. And you can always reach out to me through Gail, email me, come to the office, and we can go over these in more detail. But we're going over the basics of how to do these movements because it is so often taught wrong, and many of the exercises people do for these areas of the body are not nearly as productive as they could be. So the first one is going to be the squat, and you might see at the top there the public toilet analogy. Okay, I'm going to show you the video in a second, but let me just say that is the easiest way to learn a squat. Stand with your back to a chair, so you're standing, feet are about hip width apart. Imagine that you are on a road trip. You got to go to the bathroom. You stop in some McDonald's or Wawa or whatever, and the toilet's filthy. Now, I'll bet that generally women are better at this than we men are because they've had more experience. But you want to do what? You want to do the hover. You want to reach back with your hips. Really imagine that chair behind you is actually the toilet. Because if you don't imagine that, you might slide forward too much, in which case you would go on your shoes, which is not a good idea. So really imagine that chair as the toilet. Reach back. You'll put your arms out in front as a counterbalance if need be, and try to hover over that chair / toilet for just a second or two, and then let yourself down. Most people, when they do that move, even if they've had some knee issues and hip issues, feel pretty good. Don't really have too much pain. The opposite is when you stand up. We're not going to focus on what your squat looks like right now, going from a seated to a standing position. But I will say that every single time you get up from a seated position, when you're at the top of that squat, at the top of that standing posture, squeeze your butt muscles hard for about 5 seconds. It helps get those muscles in the front that are tight, the hip flexors, to let go. It helps get you fully upright, and then you are more stable as you start to walk. Anytime you get out of the car, anytime you're about to swing the golf club, take a moment, stand up tall, tighten those butt muscles hard, and then go about your activity. All right, let's watch the video. Public toilet squat. Reaching back with the hips, arms out as a counterbalance, knees staying right over the feet. To stand up, I demonstrated a pretty good technique at those right angles at the knees and hips. But the key is that when I get to the upright position, which is almost like a hip thrust or a ski jump, we squeeze those glutes hard. Just pointing out that my knees are right over my feet. Knees tend to drift in people with some hip issues. We don't want them to drift towards each other. We want them to stay right over the feet. Same thing again. As you come up, how you get there, you can support putting the hands on the knees or a wall or a counter, and then you tighten the glutes hard. All right? Next one, see, this takes a moment to go to it. It's called a wall sit. You might have seen this before. This is where you're just going to sit back. Your back is against the wall, so you're not doing a balance-based squat now. You're just holding this position. Okay, you slide your hips down. You can go all the way to the knees, but when you're first starting this, especially if you have any biomechanics health issues, just go a little bit down the wall. You don't need to get all the way down to a 90-degree position. And when you come back up, use the hands to support, push off the wall to get yourself upright, or if there's a chair next to you, hold on to that. I know that went kind of quickly. I want to see if I can actually I want to do that one again, actually. Just to point out that some people will do this. I don't know if it's going to give. There it is. Yeah. Some people do this with a ball behind their back, one of those exercise balls. That's good too. Usually you're going to hold this for quite a while. This is a great exercise for the quad muscles, which are the front of our thighs. And that's arguably the most important muscle to prevent falling. So this is a good strength builder, not necessarily a balance builder, but we need strength also. The next one is bridging. And I see so many people doing bridging, which is on your back, pushing your hips up from the floor. It's going to get there in a second. I see so many people doing this one incorrectly. So I put a lot of tips in here. The outside of the ankle, knee, and hip should be lined up, and the back of the heel should be right under the knee. That makes it so that you're using your butt muscle and not your hamstrings, because we want to use our butt muscles more. You don't need to go very high. People bridge all the way up till they have this straight line knee to shoulder. That's not necessary. What I'm checking there is that my hamstrings are relaxed and that my glutes are engaged. Okay, that biofeedback is really important to know that you're working the right muscles. If you do this and your hamstrings are still really tight when you touch them, you feel them really engaging, you can put a strap around the knees, which I'm about to do. And that little bit of perceived push towards the center that you will naturally resist helps better engage the butt muscles. Anybody who's ever had a pulled hamstring while shoveling snow or throwing out their back lifting the trash likely has glutes, butt muscles that aren't working as well. This is one of the best exercises that can be done in bed, on the floor, just to help activate and get you used to what it feels like. There are many ways to make it more challenging. You can lift one leg and straighten it, trying to keep the pelvis level as you lift. Okay, that's pretty advanced. I wouldn't start with that one. Start slow, know what you're supposed to feel, make sure you're feeling it, and eventually you can build on that. And I know we're going through these fast, but you can watch them over and over as much as you like. I just want to make sure we get through them all. Now we're going to move into the core. And before I move into the core, I hear all the time when I ask people if they're doing core exercises, well, the first thing you might imagine I hear is, yeah, I do sit-ups. Sit-ups are not a core exercise. Sit-ups are not even a good exercise. In fact, the military started phasing out sit-ups a few years ago because of all the back injuries. Okay? Do not judge your fitness by whether or not you can do 100 sit-ups. All right? That is not a good thing to do. That will create an injury eventually. It's a lot of pressure on the discs of the low back, and it can herniate them and has. Plank. Plank is the other one I hear about all the time. Plank is not a bad exercise, but it's static. You're not moving. And we talked about mobility before. You have to be able to move while keeping control. So plank isn't a bad start, but we want to make it more challenging so that we can learn what it's like to keep our core engaged as we move. All right, what is the job of the core? The job of your core is to resist rotation. All right, when I swing a golf club and I push off that back foot, that creates the twist. As the golf club swings around, what prevents my upper body from spinning 180 degrees on my lower body is my core. That's what slows me down. So in these exercises, you're going to see challenges to our ability to prevent rotation. That's the best core exercise you can do. All right, let's go on to those. So the first one's called the Pallof press. It's just the guy's name. Essentially, you have a stretchy band. You're perpendicular to the wall, so I'm facing perpendicular to the wall. The band has tension in it, and all I'm doing is pressing straight out in front of me and trying not to let the band turn me towards the wall. It's like an ice skater. When they spread their arms out and then pull them in, they get a lot more motion. Let me show that one again. All right, you can have as much tension or as little tension. There are a lot of variations of this. I put the name Pallof press because if you Google it and look it up on YouTube, you're going to see a million different ways to make this harder. This is the basic one. I'm not twisting my body, but as I stretch my arms out, I'm preventing my hands from twisting towards the wall. That's all core that's doing that. Okay? Next level up for core exercise is getting into the dead bug. I don't really like that name, dead bug, but it kind of looks like a dead bug, so that's why we call it that. My goal here is to keep my back flat on the floor and not let my pelvis or my low back rotate off of the floor. As side by side, I reach the same arm and leg towards the floor and back up. It's a very simple mechanical movement. I've been doing this a long time. It won't feel this easy as it looks when you first do it, but it's a great way to start because you're not standing. I'm going to show that again. There isn't a balance component. It's a very simple way to start, and there's a lot of ways to make this more challenging also. All I'll say is keep your low back from arching off the floor when you do this. And you don't have to go foot to the floor, hand to the floor. You can just go a quarter of the way or half the way. You just want to feel in that midsection on either side of the abdomen. You just want to feel things happening there. And most importantly, always don't forget to breathe. My face looks pretty normal for my facial color. But if someone says you're looking red in the face, you're not breathing. It's really important to breathe. Anyone who doesn't believe that, try not doing it. It doesn't last for long. Got one more here. These are the crawling drills. My favorite of all the core exercises. Okay, I can't pause this unfortunately, so I'll replay this in a minute. This is the baby crawl right now. Okay, I'm just gonna let you watch it, and then I'm gonna talk you through it. And then the next one I'm gonna do is called the leopard crawl, where your knees are just slightly off the ground. This is a very advanced crawling drill. This one. This is not something you start with. But what I want you to notice is how flat I keep my back. I'm resisting the urge of my hip to drop when I lift up the leg. That's what a crawling drill is. Let's show that again. The first one is called the alternating lizard crawl. I'm not moving forward. I'm just lifting one leg and the opposite arm for a second or two. Baby crawls on the hands and knees. It's all about the timing of the knee and the hand lifting and touching at the same time. You don't need a lot of space, as you can see. Any floor will do. And then this is the advanced level. It took me about 6 months or so of baby crawling to get to that point where I could do that. Okay, and then there's other ways to make that more challenging. I've seen people do that on a physio ball, which is beyond me. Just one more time there. The key for this, other than breathing, is that whichever leg is lifting, you're going to feel that side of the abdomen engaging. But what I just want you to focus on is keeping that back flat. You can bounce a little tennis ball in the small of the back and see if you can keep it there while you do these crawling drills. You can go forward, you can go backward, you can go sideways, you can go in circles. Gail was at one of my talks where we had this 90-year-old lady who insisted on getting on the floor and doing this after she recovered from multiple stress fractures, compression fractures in her back. I told her not to, she wouldn't listen. And let me tell you, she crawled like a champ, and then she got up and was like 2 inches taller when she started walking. One of the best core exercises you can do. Those are the videos. Feel free to go back and look at them. Just a little note on stretching before we finish here. Why do people stretch? I think that if we get away from this concept that, like we said before, tight muscles hurt. Tight muscles don't hurt. We want to know what we're supposed to stretch. To prevent injury, flexibility is not the key. If I have a kid with really tight ankles and a kid with really loose ankles, I know the kid with tight ankles is probably going to get injured less when he runs around the soccer field, less chance of losing control and rolling that ankle. Most people know nowadays that you don't stretch to prepare for a workout. You warm up. You get blood into the muscles. You get them perfused and pliable so they're ready for whatever you're doing. Think of a cat waking up in the morning, right? The cat just does that big stretch, and then they're good to go. They're just waking up their system, right? You can use that, by the way. Stand tall, reach the arms out to the side, up in the air, take a deep breath in, let it out. You're going to feel a lot better after that than you're going to feel after a couple minutes of stretching your hamstrings on the floor. Guaranteed. All right? Flexibility is not the same as stability. We want to be stable through motion. That's mobility. Don't worry about how far you can raise your leg. It does matter, but that's not as important as are you warming up for your exercise. Okay, if any of you use the foam rollers you got to get a little instruction on how to use them, but they're wonderful devices. They do you get much better outcomes with a foam roller than stretching. And maybe we shouldn't call it stretching. Maybe we should call it warming up. Maybe we should call it mobility work. But being able to raise my foot all the way up in the air tells me nothing about how my hip is going to work when I'm walking upstairs. Okay. This is just, if you're going to stretch, which we do teach, because there are times like those tight hip flexors or the chest muscles in the front, use this slide, this active isolated stretching, and there are gobs of videos on YouTube demonstrating every muscle in the body how to use this approach. You want to get to moderate irritation in your stretch, whatever you're doing, where it's a moderate tension in the muscle you're trying to open up. Hold it for 2 to 3 seconds, release, repeat, 10 in a row. You actually can do more than 10, but 10 is a good start. Okay, that will get you more range of motion because it's sort of unlatching the muscle rather than just yanking on it. If you just yank on a muscle, there's something called the myotatic stretch reflex that when you're done, that muscle is going to tighten up to protect itself. So use these gentle mobilization approaches, which is a lot like what yoga is. Yoga is not meant to be stretching, but there's a huge component of it that winds up creating better flexibility. That's why there's a lot of movement built into it. And at the bottom, if you don't have a foam roller, go get one. It's just so helpful. If you don't know how to use it, reach out to us, look up some videos, ask your trainer. There's just so many wonderful things you can do with it, and it's a lot cheaper than a massage, and it's a lot more effective than traditional stretching. All right, so if you're going to get started today, you're going to do some type of warm-up. That could just be walking. That could be a little turnover on the stationary bike. You're going to use those 30, 90, 8 cycles of that 30-second, 90-second interval approach. As the question was asked before, that can be 10-second, 30-second. That can be moderate intensity and low intensity. You can always lower the high intensity component, but I don't want you to raise the low intensity component. I don't mind if you go slower for the fast part in the beginning, but I never want somebody to say, yeah, so I'm feeling really strong now, so I do my 30 seconds high, and then for the 90 seconds, I just go a little bit slower. No, you want that rest period. That's important. And then at the end, a cool down. Walking around is always good. Strength, know the position you have to be in, know the movement. If that squat drill that we showed you is uncomfortable or it's hard to get through that whole range of motion getting down to the chair, find where you can get to without pain and just hold that. Hold that for 10 seconds. And then come back upright and tighten those butt muscles again. Okay? Isometric exercises, which means you're just holding it, you're not moving, are highly effective for recovery, for joint health, for bone density. There are programs based just on that. pushing your hands against the wall like you're trying to push the wall over. That's an isometric push-up. If it doesn't cause pain, you can do that. You don't need to get on the floor and try to do a full push-up day one. Build slowly into those full movements, and eventually you'll have the movement down. And dynamic stretching is just what we call that 2-second hold approach that we were just talking about. That's any stretch where you're moving is a mobility warm-up, but we still call it stretching, so we say dynamic stretching. All right, and the key to remember, and I tell my patients this all the time. Somebody says, "Oh, I saw this person doing yoga. I can't do that," or I play tennis, but this other lady's so much better than me. Okay, great. Like, I'm not going to be a professional football player. I don't want to be a professional football player, but I recognize that it's fun to throw the ball around sometimes. I don't want to be a marathoner, but I do like to do some running, sprinting mostly. Right? Wherever you are on that spectrum, what matters most is not where you start, but which way you're heading. Towards the better, towards the worse. And if you feel pain, you're slowing down, you're not going in the right direction. If you're not able to train because of time, fear, misinformation, you're not going in the right direction. Ask the questions. The investment in the beginning feels like a lot. As you get better at it, the muscle builds. You don't need to invest as much. It becomes a habit, a routine. It's easy to maintain. And the gains and the benefits long-term are unquantifiable. All the studies continue to try to quantify them. But joy, happiness, these aren't things we can quantify. So work at it. Ask your questions. If you have any now, I'm happy to take them. Look for those answers to the harder questions of how to move. And if you don't get them, reach out to someone like us. And I think that's it. Just some, see, on this slide at the very bottom there, that's my website. But just above that, the functionalmovement.com. Gail asked earlier what kind of trainers. Functionalmovement.com is the website that will list whether or not your trainer is certified in FMS. It's one technique. It's not the best. It's not the only one, but it's a really good one to start with. And that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Cerensky. That was wonderful. And I do have one question for you. So someone had a question. She said that arthritis pain keeps her from exercising. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so there are different types of arthritis. There's the primary one that we all know about is what we would call osteoarthritis, the degenerative type. And then there's the inflammatory arthritis family, which would be like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and Reiter's and all these psoriatic arthritis. Let's just talk about osteoarthritis for a moment. If you have basic degenerative arthritis, all that means is that your body and that joint have been moving improperly long enough that your body started to build new scaffolding to support it. Meaning, if I look straight ahead my whole life with my head in a neutral position, I might not have arthritis. But if I hold a phone on my right shoulder with my ear tilted to the side for 20 years as a receptionist or whatever salesman, the bones in my neck are going to start to grow out to the right. That's just basic force over time creating a need for more support. Bodies grow these bones out to the side. We call those bone spurs. We call that arthritis. Okay, so once you have a bony change in a joint, chances are that bony change isn't going away. However, the pain that you feel when you use that joint is not from that bony change. The pain is what led to that bony change. Now, there is a tipping point where a bone spur can get so large that it can be in the way, and then you have limited range of motion. But that never means, ever, that you're going to have to be in pain the rest of your life or unable to exercise. It means you need to learn better movement patterns and modify the range of motion. So somebody that raises their shoulder and gets a sharp pain in the side of the shoulder there, that's generally thought of as an impingement. If they have a bone spur there, I'm not going to make that bone spur go away. But guess what? If I get their shoulder blade to rotate better by teaching them better movement patterns through the shoulder blade, we can usually get a 20 to 30% improvement in their range of motion on day one. And then on day 3, when they come back and they say, it's kind of hurting again, did it not work? We say, well, no. You have a routine, a pattern of how you move. We need to retrain that. It's going to take a little repetition on your part to get there. But if we can see a change day 1, we know they'll get there. Arthritis in the low back becomes a big obstacle for a lot of people, including myself in the past. I do have some arthritis there. But what I found, and what you'll find, and what we see every day in clinical practice, is that when you start treating those areas of the body correctly, doing the right stretches on the correct side, not doing the wrong stretches, getting rid of habits that you might have thought were helping that are actually hurting. People with low back pain like to lay on their back and drop their legs to the side. It's called a spinal twist. Generally speaking, that's a horrible thing to do if you have low back pain. Twisting is really tough on the low back. And I would say that probably 80% of my patients that come with low back pain have been doing that exact stretch for quite some time before they came to see me. We get them to stop doing that, and almost right away they start to feel better. Right? If there's an instability that we need to support with some kind of brace, sometimes we do that. But generally speaking, the arthritis hurts because you're moving into a direction that the body can't support through that range of motion, and the pain is your body's way of saying, don't go there until you learn better how to do it. And I'll apologize because unfortunately, whoever's asking that question, I obviously don't know your specific history right now, but you're more than welcome to reach out. We can talk about that more. Generally speaking, that's the approach.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarinsky. That's very encouraging to know that there's something that can be done for those of us that are in pain. So thank you very much, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. I know I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did too. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. And once you leave the webinar today, you are going to receive a survey, and it's just a very quick 4 or 5 question survey. You just have multiple choice. We'd love your feedback just so we can, continue to provide webinars and make sure that they're what you're looking for. And so you'll also receive a follow-up email within probably within 24 hours with a link to today's webinar, so if you can watch it again. And I did email the handout to everyone before the webinar began, so if you need any of the slides or the resources that Dr. Sarinsky recommended, they're all available to you. So thank you very much for joining us, and look for our next wellness webinar probably in February. All right, so take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and thank you so much, Dr. Sarinsky.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.